I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually grateful my car got a flat tire that morning. If it hadn't, I might have missed the moment Melissa Johnson, now infamously known in the neighborhood as Pipeline Karen, was caught red-handed, right in the middle of committing her latest stunt. The morning started like any other in our quiet cul-de-sac until a series of deafening, grinding noises shattered the calm. I stepped outside and was greeted by a chaotic scene. Clouds of dust, clattering debris, and the unmistakable roar of a jackhammer echoing down the street. My driveway, my reliable path to and from home, was in ruins, its smooth surface fractured and pockmarked. But the shock didn't stop there. In the distance, I noticed a trail of smoke rising from what used to be the neighborhood gas line, now mangled and dangerously disrupted. There, in the thick of it all, stood Karen, the notorious HOA enforcer, wielding a jackhammer like a weapon of mass destruction. With a determined glint in her eye, she was busy demolishing my driveway and, by the looks of it, had carelessly struck the gas line in the process. Neighbors gathered, phones raised to capture every shocking moment, while I could only stand frozen in disbelief. Somehow, the same woman who prided herself on preserving every inch of community order had decided to take her mission a step too far. As I absorbed the mayhem, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of relief. My flat tire, a minor inconvenience the previous night, had inadvertently saved me from being in the middle of this disaster. I had a front row seat to witness Karen's latest overreach, a spectacle that would soon ignite a firestorm of digital evidence and community outrage. Today, Karen's reckless stunt would become a turning point, a bold reminder that even the most overzealous enforcers can be caught in their own destructive path. In that moment, as the jackhammer's relentless pounding reverberated through the neighborhood and the acrid smell of gasoline mingled with dust, I resolved that this was not the time to be a silent bystander. I was going to document every detail, share it with the community, and let the evidence speak for itself. Karen, in her fervor to impose order, had unwittingly set the stage for a showdown that would expose the true cost of her authoritarian ways. Crescent Grove is a gated community famed for its picture-perfect lawns, identically styled homes, and an unyielding commitment to uniformity. Every resident adheres to a strict code enforced meticulously by the Homeowners Association. The rules are detailed, down to the smallest decorative element, and deviations are met with swift fines and stern reprimands. At the center of this stringent system is Karen Miller, known to everyone as HOA Karen. In her early 50s, always dressed in impeccably pressed attire with a clipboard clutched in hand, Karen patrols Crescent Grove like a self-appointed sheriff. Her mission is to preserve the community's aesthetic perfection, and she spares no expense when it comes to punishing even the slightest infraction. I, on the other hand, have always been a bit of an outlier in this uniform world. I run a small but thriving property business on the edge of Crescent Grove, where I've built my driveway with care and maintained it as a testament to quality craftsmanship. My driveway isn't just a path. It's a symbol of the personal pride I take in my property and my right to operate it as I see fit. Over the years, I've invested in high-end construction, sustainable landscaping, and state-of-the-art security systems to safeguard my property against any interference. For me, Crescent Grove represents the classic clash between individuality and imposed conformity. While many neighbors quietly comply with the HOA's unyielding rules, I have always championed a more flexible, creative approach to property management. I believe that while order is important, it should never come at the cost of personal freedom or the opportunity to express one's unique style. This belief, however, has often put me at odds with Karen's inflexible standards. The tension between my way of life and the rigid norms of Crescent Grove had been simmering for years. I'd received fines for minor decorative choices and been warned for slight deviations from the prescribed color schemes. Yet nothing could have prepared me for the day Karen decided to take matters in her own hands by using a jackhammer to demolish my driveway. It wasn't just a punitive measure. It was an all-out assault on my right to manage my own property. The consequences of her stunt were immediately apparent. Not only was my driveway left in ruins, but the neighborhood gas line, integral to the community's infrastructure, had been damaged, creating a potential safety hazard that affected everyone. This setting, with its manicured lawns and rigid order, formed the perfect backdrop for a confrontation that would soon expose the fragility of enforced conformity. Crescent Grove's residents had long endured Karen's strict oversight and silence. But as the echoes of the jackhammer reverberated through the streets, it became clear that something had to give. And I, a man committed to the values of hard work and personal freedom, was ready to stand up against the tyranny of an overzealous enforcer. The fallout from the jackhammer incident was swift and brutal. I immediately scrambled to document the chaos, capturing every moment of destruction on my security cameras. The footage showed Karen Miller, or Pipeline Karen, as some had begun to call her after this stunt, relentlessly pounding away at my driveway, oblivious to the collateral damage inflicted upon the neighborhood gas line. Neighbors began to gather, phones in hand, and whispered theories spread like wildfire through Crescent Grove. Was this another of Karen's petty attempts to enforce her idea of perfection? Or was it a deliberate act of vandalism aimed squarely at me? Within hours, my digital dossier was complete. Timestamp video clips, photos of the ruined driveway, and even preliminary estimates of the repair costs, which were approaching $50,000. The sheer scale of the damage was staggering. It was evident that Karen had not just lost her temper. She had embarked on a mission to assert her control over every inch of Crescent Grove, even if it meant endangering public safety. I promptly submitted my evidence to the HOA board, demanding not only restitution, but also immediate disciplinary action against Karen for her reckless behavior. However, knowing the board's long-standing deference to Karen's strict interpretation of the rules, I braced myself for a protracted battle. The initial response was tepid, a vague promise of investigation that I knew would do little to repair the damage already done. As the day wore on, the community's outrage began to mount. Online forums and social media channels buzzed with discussions of the incident. Neighbors expressed their shock and sympathy, and many recounted previous grievances with Karen's heavy-handed enforcement. Hashtags like hashtag #NoMoreKaren and hashtag #FixOurDriveway started trending locally. The digital evidence was undeniable, and the public sentiment was clear: enough was enough. Fueled by anger and a fierce sense of justice, I resolved that I would not allow Karen's abuse of power to go unchallenged. I began planning my next steps meticulously. I contacted local repair contractors to assess the damage to both my driveway and the gas line, and the estimates confirmed that the cost would indeed be astronomical. I also gathered testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed the incident, each story painting a picture of a community pushed to its limits by arbitrary fines and destructive enforcement. The HOA board eventually called an emergency meeting to discuss the incident. I attended that meeting with my digital dossier in tow, determined to hold them accountable for the negligence that had allowed Karen's actions to wreak havoc on our community. In the meeting, I presented my case passionately, outlining every piece of evidence and every public outcry. I argued that Karen's actions were not only a violation of my property rights, but a public hazard that affected the safety and well-being of all residents. The board's response was divided. Some members expressed regret and promised to take action, while others defended Karen's methods as necessary for maintaining community standards. The discord within the board only fueled the community's outrage and my digital petition, calling for the removal of Karen from any position of influence, quickly gathered thousands of signatures. That night, as I reviewed the day's events, I couldn't shake the feeling that a dramatic turning point was imminent. Karen's reckless use of a jackhammer had not only destroyed my driveway, but had also ignited a firestorm of public opinion. The evidence was clear, the costs were astronomical, and the community's patience had worn thin. It was time to force the HOA board's hand and to demand a resolution that would restore order and protect our rights. Over the next several days, the uproar in Crescent Grove grew louder. Social media platforms were awash with images and video clips of the jackhammer incident. Neighbors who had long suffered in silence began to speak out. Posts with hashtags like hashtag no more Karen, hashtag fix our driveway, and hashtag community justice trended locally, drawing national attention to what was quickly becoming a symbol of bureaucratic overreach. Local news stations arrived on the scene. Reporters captured the devastated state of my driveway and the damaged gas line, interviewing shocked residents who recounted similar incidents of Karen's heavy-handed enforcement. "It's absurd," one resident said. "She finds people for every little thing, and now she's taken it too far." The narrative shifted rapidly from a personal dispute to a broader call for reform in how the HOA enforced its rules. Inside the HOA board, tensions boiled over. Emergency meetings were held in secretive boardrooms, and leaked minutes revealed a bitter internal struggle. Some board members, swayed by the overwhelming evidence and the fierce public outcry, began to question Karen's long-held authority. "We need to protect our residents' rights," one member was quoted as saying in a leaked memo. Others remained loyal to Karen's uncompromising stance, insisting that strict order was essential for property values. The board's inability to reach a consensus only further eroded public trust. I continued to update my digital platforms with every new development. I posted detailed reports of the damage estimates, live-streamed community meetings, and shared interviews with affected neighbors. The digital petition demanding Karen's removal and the overhaul of HOA policies reached tens of thousands of signatures. Every shared post was a declaration that our community would no longer tolerate the arbitrary and destructive actions of a single enforcer. Meanwhile, Karen herself became increasingly desperate. In a series of hastily recorded social media videos, she attempted to justify her actions, claiming that the jackhammer stunt was a necessary measure to remind homeowners to comply with community standards. But every excuse was undermined by the stark reality of the destruction and the overwhelming public support for those who had been victimized by her overreach. The local utility company also got involved when the damaged gas line began causing intermittent outages in parts of Crescent Grove. This not only heightened safety concerns, but also provided further evidence that Karen's actions were more than a mere nuisance. They had real, tangible consequences for the entire community. Emergency meetings with utility representatives and local government officials ensued, and it became clear that the scandal had far-reaching implications. As pressure mounted, the HOA board finally announced that a final public hearing would be held to address the incident and determine the future of their enforcement policies. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community. In the days leading up to the hearing, neighbors organized rallies, distributed flyers, and prepared impassioned speeches. The sense of unity was palpable, and every resident seemed determined to see justice done. On the morning of the final hearing, the atmosphere in Crescent Grove was electric. The community center was packed with residents, local officials, and media representatives. The air buzzed with anticipation and a shared resolve to reclaim our rights. The digital dossier of evidence, meticulously compiled from security footage, damage reports, and personal testimonies, was displayed for all to see, a testament to the truth that had been uncovered. Every shared hashtag and every supportive comment online underscored one message: the days of arbitrary fines and petty enforcement were over. The final public hearing was not just a forum for debate. It was a defining moment that would force the HOA board to confront the consequences of their lax oversight and the unchecked power of an overzealous enforcer. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp morning in a packed boardroom at the Crescent Grove Community Center. The room was filled with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of determined residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would decide the future of our neighborhood's enforcement policies. With a calm, yet unyielding presence, Councilwoman Diane Reynolds stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the hope and determination of a community that had had enough. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed damage assessments, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Reynolds began, her voice ringing with authority. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her reckless jackhammer stunt that not only destroyed a private driveway, but also compromised our neighborhood gas line, were driven by personal vendetta and a gross abuse of power. Our community's fundamental rights to private property and safe living conditions must be upheld, and no one should be allowed to impose their will through such arbitrary enforcement. A heavy silence settled over the room as Reynolds continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions imposed in connection with this incident, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the policies and practices that permitted such overreach. Furthermore, we will establish new guidelines that protect the rights of every resident to manage their own property without fear of undue interference. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an unjust fine. It is a resounding declaration that Crescent Grove will stand for fairness, accountability, and the inalienable right to live without arbitrary enforcement of personal vendettas. Her words resonated deeply, and murmurs of approval spread throughout the assembly. At that moment, a well-respected community advocate, a longtime champion of property rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice strong and impassioned. "No resident should ever have their home or property treated as a canvas for one person's misguided crusade. Let this vote mark the turning point, a clear signal that our community values innovation, independence, and the sanctity of private property above all else. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a powerful call for reform. Following his address, a senior officer from the local public safety office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert assessments, and official reports that confirmed the legitimacy of my property rights and exposed every facet of the incident. The evidence was irrefutable. Karen Miller's actions were an abuse of power, and the damage inflicted was clear for all to see. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against those responsible, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Reynolds concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Crescent Grove, a community where every resident's rights are honored and where public authority is exercised with fairness and integrity. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, no matter how self-righteous, can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the right to live freely and safely on our own property." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights and safe community standards. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of our community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Crescent Grove. The days of petty, arbitrary rule enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Crescent Grove underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and the sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, sparking passionate debates about property rights, community governance, and personal freedom. Editorials in the local newspaper, bearing headlines such as "A New Dawn for Crescent Grove" and "Community United for Justice," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect every resident's right to manage their property without fear of arbitrary interference. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOA bullying, and #CommunityJustice trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand up against unchecked power. Town hall meetings and community forums saw a record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future where creativity and independence were celebrated rather than suppressed. Neighbors who had long endured the oppressive oversight of the HOA now spoke openly about their right to live freely and express themselves in ways that reflected their unique identities. Our land is our legacy, and we must protect it at all costs, one impassioned resident declared, his voice echoing throughout the crowded room. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Crescent Grove would always honor the rights and freedoms of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was carefully scrutinized and that no resident would ever again be subject to arbitrary fines or punitive actions. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed at a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and fairness. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to empower residents further. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about the importance of property rights and creative expression. When we stand together, our voices are powerful enough to challenge even the most entrenched systems. A local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for a more inclusive and equitable governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and transformative. My decision to retaliate against HOA Karen Miller's destructive jackhammer stunt by rebuilding my driveway, exposing her recklessness, and standing up for my property rights had not only restored my dignity, but had also ignited a movement throughout Crescent Grove. Neighbors, once intimidated by arbitrary fines and rigid enforcement, found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance. The digital evidence that had exposed Karen's misdeeds became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to live freely. Karen Miller, once the feared enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence waned rapidly as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for reform and the dangers of unchecked power. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Crescent Grove, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the gentle glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading, "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights," was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches echoed with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate our victory over arbitrary interference, a victory for every homeowner in our community, Councilwoman Reynolds proclaimed, her voice ringing with determination. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protecting our freedoms and ensuring that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Crescent Grove, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen Miller's reckless jackhammer stunt not only destroyed my driveway, but also jeopardized community safety, was transformed into a rallying cry for every resident who believed that property rights and individual freedom were non-negotiable. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Crescent Grove, truth, justice, and the right to live independently would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Crescent Grove would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual property were cherished above all else.